There is a fire burning inside your body right now, and you probably cannot feel it. Not because it is small, but because it has been burning for so long that your body has stopped sending the obvious alarm signals. No fever, no visible swelling, no dramatic symptoms that would send you to a doctor. Just a quiet, sustained, low-level inflammatory state that is working its way through your cardiovascular system, your brain, your gut, your joints, and your immune function, slowly and silently contributing to the conditions that will eventually become impossible to ignore. Chronic inflammation is not a disease in itself. It is the biological environment in which most modern diseases develop. Heart disease, type 2 diabetes, depression, Alzheimer's, autoimmune conditions, cancer. The research connecting chronic low-grade inflammation to each of these conditions is not speculative. It is one of the most consistently replicated findings in modern medicine. And the most important part, the part that most people never hear, is that chronic inflammation is not inevitable. It is largely a product of how you live. And how you live is something you can change. The first thing to understand is what inflammation actually is, because the word is used so frequently and so loosely that most people have lost sight of what it actually means biologically. Inflammation is your immune system's emergency response to threat. When your body detects a genuine threat, a pathogen, a wound, a toxin, it activates a cascade of biological responses designed to contain and eliminate the threat and initiate repair. This acute inflammatory response is not just normal, it is essential. Without it, a cut would never heal, an infection would never resolve, and your body would have no mechanism for repairing damaged tissue. The problem is not inflammation itself. The problem is when the inflammatory response does not turn off. When the immune system remains in a state of low-level activation, not because of an acute threat, but because of a chronic pattern of inputs, food, stress, sleep deprivation, physical inactivity, environmental toxins, gut dysbiosis, that the body interprets as a sustained low-level threat, requiring a sustained low-level response. This is chronic inflammation, not the dramatic heat and swelling of an acute immune response. A quiet, persistent immune activation that runs in the background of your biology, month after month, year after year, gradually eroding the systems it was designed to protect. The biology of chronic inflammation involves a class of signaling molecules called cytokines, proteins produced by immune cells that coordinate the inflammatory response. In acute inflammation, cytokines spike dramatically and then resolve. In chronic inflammation, specific pro-inflammatory cytokines, particularly interleukin-6, interleukin-1 beta, and tumor necrosis factor alpha, remain persistently elevated at levels that are below the threshold of acute disease, but above the threshold of genuine biological equilibrium. These chronically elevated cytokines do not just cause localized damage. They travel through the bloodstream and affect virtually every organ system in the body. In the brain, they cross the blood-brain barrier and activate microglia, the brain's immune cells, producing a state of neuroinflammation that is increasingly recognized as a major contributor to depression, cognitive decline, brain fog, and the pathological processes that eventually produce neurodegenerative disease. In the cardiovascular system, they promote the formation of atherosclerotic plaques, the arterial buildups that underlie heart attack and stroke. In the metabolic system, they promote insulin resistance and contribute to the development of type 2 diabetes. And in the gut, they disrupt the integrity of the intestinal lining and alter the composition of the microbiome, which in turn generates more pro-inflammatory signals, creating a self-sustaining loop of gut dysfunction and systemic inflammation. What drives this chronic inflammatory state? The research consistently identifies the same cluster of lifestyle factors, and recognizing them is the beginning of doing something about it. The first is diet. The standard modern diet, high in refined carbohydrates, industrial seed oils, ultra-processed foods, added sugars, and low in fiber, polyphenols, and omega-3 fatty acids, is one of the most potent drivers of chronic inflammation that exists. Refined sugars and refined carbohydrates spike blood glucose and drive the production of advanced glycation end products, molecular structures that directly activate inflammatory pathways. Industrial seed oils high in omega-6 fatty acids, canola, sunflower, soybean, corn, shift the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio in ways that systematically favor pro-inflammatory signaling. Ultra-processed foods contain a cocktail of additives, emulsifiers, preservatives, artificial colorings, that research increasingly links to gut microbiome disruption and increased intestinal permeability, what is colloquially called leaky gut, which allows bacterial components to cross into the bloodstream and trigger systemic immune activation. And low-fiber intake starves the gut microbiome of the fermentable substrates it needs to produce short-chain fatty acids, particularly butyrate, which are among the most potent anti-inflammatory compounds the body produces. The second major driver is chronic stress. You already understand from our earlier videos on cortisol that chronic psychological stress maintains the HPA axis in a state of sustained activation. What that video did not fully explore is the direct connection between chronic cortisol elevation and inflammatory signaling. Cortisol is normally anti-inflammatory. It is one of the body's primary mechanisms for resolving acute inflammation. But when cortisol is chronically elevated, the immune system develops resistance to its anti-inflammatory signals, in the same way that chronically elevated insulin eventually produces insulin resistance. The result is a paradox. The stress hormone designed to suppress inflammation loses its ability to do so, and pro-inflammatory signaling goes unchecked. Sleep deprivation compounds this. Even a single night of insufficient sleep produces measurable increases in pro-inflammatory cytokines, and chronic sleep restriction maintains inflammatory markers at levels that research associates with increased disease risk across multiple organ systems. The third driver is physical inactivity. Regular, moderate-intensity exercise is one of the most potent anti-inflammatory interventions available, and its mechanisms are specific and well understood. Muscle contraction during exercise releases a class of signaling molecules called myokines, particularly interleukin-6, which in this context acts not as a pro-inflammatory signal, but as an anti-inflammatory one, stimulating the production of interleukin-10, an interleukin-1 receptor antagonist, which actively suppress inflammatory cascades. Regular exercise also reduces visceral fat, the metabolically active fat stored around the abdominal organs, which is itself a major source of pro-inflammatory cytokine production. And it improves insulin sensitivity, reduces oxidative stress, and supports the diversity of the gut microbiome, all of which contribute to a lower baseline inflammatory state. So what does the anti-inflammatory life actually look like in practice? It is not a supplement protocol or a restrictive elimination diet. It is a set of daily inputs: food, movement, sleep, stress management, and social connection that systematically shift your biological environment away from chronic inflammatory activation and toward the state of immune equilibrium that your body was designed to maintain. In terms of food, prioritizing whole, minimally processed foods, particularly vegetables, fruits, legumes, whole grains, fatty fish, olive oil, nuts, and seeds, while significantly reducing refined sugars, ultra-processed foods, and industrial seed oils. In terms of movement, 30 minutes of moderate aerobic exercise most days, not because of its caloric expenditure, but because of its specific anti-inflammatory myokine signaling. In terms of sleep, 7 to 9 hours of quality sleep with consistent circadian timing, because sleep is when the inflammatory repair processes that your biology requires actually occur. In terms of stress, the nervous system regulation practices we have covered throughout this series: breathwork, time in nature, social connection, boundaries, and the reduction of chronic cortisol through genuine recovery windows. And in terms of gut health, prioritizing dietary fiber diversity, fermented foods, and the reduction of gut, disrupting inputs like alcohol, artificial sweeteners, and ultra-processed food additives. If you made it to the end of this video, you now understand something that most people never connect. that the tiredness, the brain fog, the mood instability, the persistent low energy, the frequent illness, and the vague sense that your body is not functioning the way it should. These are not just symptoms of individual problems. They are often the downstream consequences of a single biological state: chronic inflammation. And that state is not a fixed condition. It is a dynamic biological environment that responds to daily inputs. Start today with one change. One meal that reduces the inflammatory load. One walk that triggers the myokine response. One extra hour of sleep that allows the repair processes to complete. That single change, repeated consistently, begins to shift the environment. Share this video with someone who feels chronically unwell without a clear explanation. Because sometimes the most important thing you can offer someone is a framework that connects what they feel to what they do. Subscribe to continue this journey, because the next video is going to bring us into one of the most important and least understood experiences of human life: grief. Why it is not linear, what science says about how it actually moves through the body and the psyche, and how to honor it in a way that allows it to transform rather than calcify. See you there.